What's going on? This is the Shonee Jackson Show, episode 14. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Like and subscribe. You know the deal. And as well as liking and subscribing, if you're doing that, if you like the show, please share these videos with somebody you know that you think also would enjoy this type of content. That'll go a long way for me growing the channel and allowing me to do this the rest of my life, as I say many times. Other than that, let's get right into the episode. It's the college day. We got some tasty topics to get into. Arch Manning and his development, making moves at Texas. And no, I'm not talking about making a move on the starting job, just in his progression, maybe being a little ahead of the curve, right? Going to talk about where he's at on that, as well as a little comparison to him in his quarterback class. Many five stars out of that class expected to start this year. Let's compare him to them, as well as the other quarterbacks scattered throughout the class, and maybe do a little prediction on who comes out QB number one down the line when it's all said and done out of the 2023 quarterback class. That, as well as a conversation on the five-star out of Lewisville, Texas. Shout out to Lewisville, Texas. Spent last weekend there with my girlfriend's family. Five-star Michael Fasausi making his decision on Oklahoma, Texas, and Texas A&M. I'm going to talk about his decision, my prediction on where he ends up, or where he commits to at least when he makes his verbal commitment, and then the Longhorns NIL situation, where they stand on that, how it's probably different than you just assume that it is. The AP released their initial top 25 preseason poll. Going to give my reaction to that as well as a few other things going around the country. So let's get right into it at the very top. Arch Manning. Going to start playing his highlights on a B-roll and take a sip of water. Arch Manning's making moves at Texas. As I said last weekend, they had their second scrimmage, and I talked about things like the running back injuries, Anthony Hill Jr., and other standouts from the scrimmage. Didn't dive too much into Arch Manning, and some of that stuff leaked in the reporting throughout the week, so I didn't know everything yet. And yet, saying all that, there was a lot of Arch Manning news that we should talk about. Arch Manning, when the scrimmage started, from what I heard through Orange Bloods on 3 and all the Longhorns reporting, is he started off that scrimmage on fire. And there were text messages going out, kind of your proverbial Arch Manning eyeball emoji type situation, whereas he was lighting the world on fire, and Quinn Ewers, I wouldn't say was playing slow, but just wasn't lighting the world on fire, right? And so you automatically assume when those guys were getting those messages or those type of reports that, oh boy, this is about to start a storm of drama within the Austin, Texas Longhorns football market, right? As if everything Arch Manning does already, disregard these spring game highlights that you're watching. He could lose his ID. He could decide to be in a video game. Anything that he sends out, an Instagram post or a tweet or any Arch Manning news that comes out in general is already going to make national news, right? Let alone him outperforming Quinn Ewers in a scrimmage. Well, second half comes around, and I'm not going to say Arch Manning played awful. I wasn't there, but he made some costly turnovers that you can't make, especially if you're going to be the starting quarterback or a SEC championship caliber starting quarterback type of guy in this level of college football, right? So let's talk about that and compare and contrast where Arch Manning is compared to where Quinn Ewers is, and the other top quarterbacks in the country, mentally and in their development, right? So first and foremost, I don't have Arch Manning's like completion totals or touchdown totals, but I think it's safe to assume he was throwing touchdown passes and the ball wasn't really touching the ground in the first half, right? As compared to whatever Quinn Ewers was doing. But the major difference in the full scrimmage, first quarter to fourth quarter, or however the format was beginning to end, was Quinn Ewers had no turnovers and no costly mistakes that hurt his team, whereas Arch Manning absolutely did and has to learn from them and grow out of doing that, right? When Arch Manning is dialed in, like you saw in the spring game and in these highlights, and like what the people in attendance of that scrimmage saw in the first half of the scrimmage, and probably many other scrimmages or 11-on-11 scenarios throughout the spring, then he is just as good as not only Quinn Ewers, but every other quarterback in the country, if not better, with his ability to quickly process, get the ball out with that lightning fast release, and his big body frame with the athleticism that he has. He is the biggest, strongest, fastest Manning that we have seen to date. Which is why I say bozos that tried to jump on another narrative that he was overrated because of the name on the back of his jersey, whether they did that for clicks or they did it because they're just total weirdos, I don't know, cough cough Mike Farrell, that's where you're wrong, right? He shows the flashes in the ceiling of potential Super Bowl winning quarterback like his uncles. I think the reality to Arch Manning, barring injury, barring any type of disaster happening off the field, knock on wood, his ceiling is Peyton and Eli, Hall of Fame Super Bowl champion. His floor is Archie, good starting or above average starting quarterback in the NFL. Right? Like, there's not many people in the world that exist in that realm. So, it's safe to assume when he's dialed, being year 2 in this system, with the type of weapons that are with the Longhorns, even if he's going with the 2s, that he looks like an absolute superstar, potential number 1 overall pick, maybe better than your starter, right? But the reality is, he's 19, just like all these other 19-year-old quarterbacks, and there's growing pains and things that you have to learn, whereas Quinn has already experienced that in 2 years of starting at Texas, and he is at a place where he echoes the phrase that Steve Sarkisian uses so often, and probably anybody that's been around the game of football has heard in the past, of whether it be a coach or just anybody involved in football has said before, and that is the classic phrase, you don't go broke taking a profit. Sark says it all the time, and if you paid close attention to Quinn Ewers, whether it be at SEC Media Days or in other interviews that he's done throughout the offseason, he has echoed, you don't go broke making a profit, and it's obviously been an important aspect to the development of Quinn Ewers. Take you back to Quinn Ewers. Like Arch Manning, he was at one point the consensus number 1 quarterback in the country. He was one of the highest rated composite scores in the history of composite scores since that stuff began in the early 2000s, right? He was one of the highest rated quarterbacks in the history of high school rankings coming out. He reclassified. He was so good, he skipped his senior year to go to Ohio State. That's all well documented. He comes to Texas, and his freshman year starting was very up and down, right? ULM, his first start, kind of a sluggish game. He threw an interception on his very first pass at Texas. He didn't light ULM on fire. Then he bounces back and he starts playing that first half of that Alabama game, number 2 team in the country, like his head is on fire, like that mullet was on fire, and he looked like the best quarterback in America. Gets hurt in that game. That happens. He comes back a few weeks later, lights Oklahoma's world on fire. And then the following week, loses to Oklahoma State. Looked like he was drowning, couldn't process coverage, couldn't make completions consistently, ball touched the ground way too often, a lot of miscommunication, and that was up and down on that wave all year long, right? Comes back, year 2, makes a massive jump in his consistently, gets dialed in on the deep ball with Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, and others, plays his biggest games in the biggest games, whether that was Alabama, whether it was against Oklahoma, even in a loss. He got dialed, finished like 30 of 31 or whatever it was to end that game. Sorry, I got a little acid reflex. Anyhow, finished 30 of 31, go on, you lose that game, but later on in the season, whether it be a ranked game against Kansas before Oklahoma or the Big 12 championship game where he essentially broke every record of the Big 12 championship game before halftime, it was just a very big year 1 to year 2 leap. Now, I would say Arch Manning has made that same year 1 to year 2 leap, if not even more so, but like Quinn even a year ago, in camp reports going into the season, you did still hear about turnovers. You did still hear, well, the first half he looked like the best quarterback in America, but the second half he made some decisions and mistakes that could have put us in a bad position in the game. You didn't really see it in the regular season. He toned it back, although the Oklahoma game he had some turnovers. There were some moments in some games where there were turnovers early in the game, and then he checked out of that, and like I said, the ball would just stop touching the ground. Well, going into year 3, I think that you've heard about all the growth of the vocal leadership in Quinn Ewers and the overall just face of the franchise type maturity and persona that he has embraced so well this season, off-season. You've heard about all of that, right? Well, I think that there's some of that exists in just executing the offense and taking what the defense gives you, a la you don't go broke taking a profit. So go back to last week's scrimmage, whereas maybe those opportunities in when Arch was going, whether he was going versus the 1s or the 2s, I don't really know how the format works, whether it's 1s versus 2s, offense versus defense, or it's 1s versus 1s and 2s versus 2s, good versus good type situation. I don't really know. And yet, opportunities were being presented to him, and he was capitalizing. putting the ball where it needed to be, maybe taking off, making some plays with his feet, doing a little bit of everything, looking like, oh my God, this guy's ready to rock. And I think he is ready to rock. And yet, he starts pressing in the second half, wanting to do the same thing, wanting to have the greatest scrimmage of all time, and he made costly turnovers, whereas Quinn Ewers was just consistently, for 4 quarters or whatever the format was in the scrimmage, taking what the defense gave him. And that's all he has to do all the way to the SEC championship, all the way to the playoffs, and potentially the national championship, right? So, like I said, I think Arch Manning in his development is right where he's supposed to be, if not ahead of where he's supposed to be. I think Arch Manning is in a place in his development where he's ready to take over and potentially win the SEC himself, just like I think Quinn Ewers could do. I think Arch Manning, if he was to start for this Texas team this year, would push for being a Heisman finalist, just like I think Quinn Ewers would do. That said, Arch, when dialed, has those elite flashes of being the very best. And yet he's still developing, and Quinn Ewers has absolutely zero concern of losing his job this year. Why do I say that? Well, he has a proven track record. I talked about it a few weeks back when I was comparing Quinn Ewers to Carson Beck and Shadur Sanders a year ago, even though he missed some games, which is why his touchdowns are down and even his yards are down from what it would have been. This would probably be closer between 3,800 passing yards to 4,000 passing yards instead of 3,479. And the touchdown total would be closer to 30, if not above 30, if he didn't miss the 2.5, three games that he missed last year, right? So, I say that to say he had 3,400 passing yards, 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, a 78.3 QBR. Let's talk about some of his splits in games a year ago. At home, he was 138 for 195, a 70.8% completion percentage, 12 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. On the road, he had 1,769 passing yards, 67.3% completion percentage, 10 touchdowns to 1 interception on the road. So the maturity of playing big on the road, playing big in tough environments, he showed that already a year ago, right? Let's talk about his fourth quarter splits. This is something that is very impressive to Quinn Ewers to me, right? A lot of Quinn Ewers turnovers, 6 touchdowns to 3 interceptions in the first quarter of games last year, 5 to 3 in the second quarter of games last year. In the second half, what is this? Is this a whole game log? I don't know. But he has 5 and 6 touchdowns. Yeah, so this is his total game log. No interceptions a year ago in the second half of games from Quinn Ewers. 0 interceptions in the third or fourth quarter of games last year. His QBR in the fourth quarter last year was 197.8. He had a 782 passing yards with a 75.7% completion percentage in the fourth quarter of games last year. All right? Proven track record of trustworthy franchise quarterback in Quinn Ewers. Did not throw an interception in the second half last year. What did Arch Manning do in this scrimmage? He threw multiple interceptions or had multiple turnovers in the second half of the game, right? Not to mention, Quinn Ewers is the potential and my predicted number 1 overall pick going into next year's draft. This is rich people problems that the University of Texas is dealing with in the quarterback room. Not a quarterback controversy. Rich people problems. They got 2 potential number 1 overall picks in the room. So the first number 1 overall pick at his very best might be slightly below, and that's still a maybe. Like, we don't really know. Might be slightly below the backup potential number 1 overall pick in Arch Manning. And then, like I said, last but not least, he is already the face of the franchise, the leader of the locker room. And that is well established. You can tell by the way the other players regurgitate the things that Quinn Ewers says and echoes, whether it be in press conference or other things. When you hear them speak, they're regurgitating the words that you hear come out of Quinn Ewers' mouth. That is leadership 101. That's how you know a team is bought into a player. He is a Big 12 champion. He is already, he didn't win the personal accolades due to injuries a year ago, but I think he was clearly the best quarterback in his conference. Head-to-head, he beat Jalen Milroe. He won a Big 12 championship, like I said. He beat, Jalen Daniels, the Kansas quarterback. Neck and neck with Dillon Gabriel, outplayed Dillon Gabriel in that game, although Dillon Gabriel ended up getting the last laugh and winning the game. Quinn Ewers got the last laugh in winning the conference. proven commodity on Saturdays, not just in scrimmages, not just in spring games. And although I believe Arch Manning is absolutely going to translate to Saturdays right away when he steps in there, and maybe we get a glimpse of that in moments throughout the season this year, he is not ahead of Quinn as being the face of the franchise, and his time is coming, but it has not arrived. We still have to wait and be patient and enjoy and be grateful for what Quinn Ewers is as the face of the franchise this year, because it's as good as we've had in at least 10 years, potentially, if not ever. All right, Quinn Ewers' ceiling, he could break every record that exists with quarterbacks at the University of Texas this year. That's absolutely on the table. So let's just be grateful and enjoy this last ride with Quinn while being very happy and excited about the future with Arch, Trey Owens, and the other high school recruits coming in the next few years, right? Let's talk about Arch Manning's recruiting class a little bit. Arch Manning came out of a loaded recruiting class. Oops. Start with him at the very top. I got the 24/7 industry rankings here. Arch Manning at the very top. Nico Amanalivia. I can't pronounce his name yet. Out of Tennessee. He is going to start at Tennessee this year. Dante Moore went to UCLA, now at Oregon. Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma. Malachi Nelson at USC. Jaden Rashada to Arizona State. His dramatic recruitment is well documented. Austin Mack to Washington. Avery Johnson going to start at Kansas State this year. They're very excited for him. Big 12 champion potential out of that. The list goes on and on and on, right? So let's talk about it, and let me give you my early predictions on who's going to come out, and let's give, maybe my top 3 to top 5 predictions of when these guys enter the draft here in a few years. So Arch Manning, as I just said, he's going to be backing up Quinn Ewers this year. We don't anticipate, barring injury to Quinn Ewers, that we see an extended amount of tape on Arch Manning this year, but you already know, as I just said, I think the sky is through the roof. The sky is the limit with Arch Manning, and he's going to be the best that comes out of this class. Nico, he is anticipated to have a huge year for Tennessee this year as a first-year starter, redshirt freshman. Potential through the roof, 6'5", 195, great athlete, lively arm, can throw on the run, can do everything you want in that veer and shoot system that he's going to play in. He plays in a system that is very favorable to put up gaudy numbers. Remember Malik Hooker a few years ago? Well, his ceiling's a lot higher than even Malik Hooker's, and I like Malik Hooker. Dante Moore out of Oregon, he is not going to be starting this year. Will be sitting behind a veteran in his own right. A true definition of a veteran in Milroe Gabriel. Jackson Arnold, his first year starting out of Oklahoma. Malachi Nelson is not starting at USC. He is sitting behind Miller Moss. Jaden Rashada, I think he's starting at Arizona State. And Avery Johnson, like I said, is starting. And I think Austin Mack is starting as well, but I'm not sure. Let's start with Nico. I think Nico and Arch are going to be fighting out of all of this class for 1 and 2. 1 versus 2 is Arch versus Nico. Well, Nico's got an interesting match against Jackson Arnold in the second week of the year. I think it's the second week. It's either the second. No, it's the first SEC game. So I think it's the 4th game of the year for both teams. Going to Norman, Oklahoma. The return of Nico's head coach. Josh Heupel, the last quarterback to win a national championship for the Sooners. That is an exciting matchup. Well, reports out of Norman, out of Jackson Arnold, we'll just talk about him included in this, since that's what we're talking about, is that he's still having some turnover issues throughout training camp. Now, you're going to turn it over in training camp, and if you're going to be risky and do stupid stuff, do it in practice and not in games, all right? So that's fair, and also Oklahoma is anticipated to have a very good secondary and defense. One of the tops in the SEC is what they hope to accomplish this year. So that could be part of the problem. Is Tennessee's defense as good as Oklahoma's? I don't know. And does that carry on? My thing is, that is my criticism of Jackson Arnold and my criticism of him, and why I think he's rightfully ranked behind Nico and Arch in this list from 24/7, is because he does not process defense coverage and get the ball, make sure he's making the right decision as fast as these two guys do, Arch and Nico. Right? Or even Dante Moore, right? So that's an aspect that he's going to have to get over, not only to just be good and compete with these two players in the SEC. The 3 quarterbacks, Arch, Nico, and Jackson, are all SEC quarterbacks. But if he's going to pass these guys up and be a first-round draft pick or QB1 in whichever draft that these guys start to come out in, then he's going to have to make a huge jump in the processing aspect of the game, right? Dante Moore we're going to see, because we talk about Oregon, and everybody in the world wants to crown Oregon champions and national title contenders year in, year out, although they haven't made the playoffs yet. I know the expanded 12-team playoffs, they absolutely should this year. They're preseason number 3 in America. They're already crowned, but in my opinion, if Oregon's going to take the step into what people are predicting them to become, even myself at times have predicted them to potentially come, they're going to have to take a step up in quarterback play, and I don't think it's going to happen this year with Dylan Gabriel. Can Dante Moore take them from good, reliable quarterback play to elite quarterback play, right? They got very good quarterback play from Bo Nix, but it wasn't elite, and he could not 2 straight years overcome and win, outperform the games against those elite teams in the elite games, conference championship games, games to get to those games or games to get to the playoffs. I would say more so than anything, the lack of that elite quarterback might be what's held Oregon back and might be what holds them back in the future. So, my official, non-official prediction on that is Arch will be QB1 out of this 2023 class. Nico will be 2nd. Dante will be 3rd. And one of the guys between Rashada, Austin Mack will be 4th. Jackson Arnold will be 5th. And that comes down, Jackson Arnold, to his coaching staff staying intact. It should. You would imagine it would, because they just gave an extension to his head coach that I've already told you I don't think was warranted. I digress. So you would think that they would, but they've already replaced the coordinator that was heavy in recruiting him. Say this year doesn't go the way he wants it to. There's frustration. I don't anticipate a coordinator gets fired again, because then that's 2 failed coordinators for Brent Venables, and I don't know how it would make sense to believe in Brent Venables if he can't find a coordinator that he trusts. So I anticipate his coordinator is safe. Is Jackson Arnold going to stay at Oklahoma? Is there a potential of Mississippi State boy, Art Briles' boy, to call up Jackson Arnold after Shapen leaves if Jackson Arnold has a frustrating year at Oklahoma and wants to go play in the system he was recruited to play in? All right. I don't know, but that's interesting. Let me know in the comments what you think about that recruiting class, what you think about Arch Manning and how he's developing, the reports about his development. Do you believe them? Do you see the ceiling of Arch Manning, or are you going to die on the hill that Arch Manning is overrated because of the name on his back? Let me know. Let's debate about it. Let's talk. Embrace debate. Embrace engagement. Right? That's what the SJ show is all about. Let's move on. Michael Fasausi, 5-star tackle out of Louisville. He has a decision coming up between Texas, Oklahoma, and A&M. Alabama, other schools are in the mix, but it seems like the top 3, it's definitely Texas, Oklahoma, and A&M. There are some wild rumors that seem to have some merit to them on the NIL demand for Michael Fasausi, and not just Michael Fasausi, but really the demand for a 5-star left tackle, right? Outside of quarterbacks in the NIL space, I am not quite sure that anybody makes more than the guys that protect their blind side, and rightfully so, right? So this decision, I'm not saying every single aspect of this decision is coming down to the highest bidder, but that's definitely weighing heavily on the decision of Michael Fasausi and family. And let's talk about it. Let's talk about where Texas stands on it, what I think happens, whether that happens or not, what I think the reasoning is, and then a larger conversation on that NIL detached from Michael. All right? So Michael, this is, I don't want to call it as sure as it gets, because there's been, historically speaking, a lot of 5-star bust with offensive linemen and tackles specifically. So I'm not going to call anybody a surefire thing, especially at a position like that takes years to develop. So first and foremost, a guy like Kelvin Banks that walked in as a freshman, a true freshman at Texas, and was already on an All-American level, is as rare as it usually gets. Like, in my opinion, as ready as he is to play, he's not ready to start in the SEC, whether that's for Texas, Oklahoma, or A&M. Right? I still think he needs to get in the weight room, build out his frame a little bit more, build some more man strength, refine some technique things. And I'm not an offensive line philosopher by any stretch of the imagination, but that is just my football knowledge, my football eye, what I see when I watch tape. I think he's very, very good. That's why he's a 5-star, number 12 player nationally, number 3 tackle in the country, number 5 player in the state of Texas, or number 8 player in the state of Texas. That's why, right? Because he's obviously a lot more mature, and that's why 5-stars are 5-stars. But it's just a position that is so important and so hard to transition into. It usually takes at least a year to develop into. So when you're talking about, and rumors have it, he's going to get paid more than $1 million wherever he goes. That's going to be the standard, and that's the starting point of discussion of what he is making. And you're at Texas, and you got a starting tackle in Kelvin Banks, which you expect to leave, but you got depth in a really, really good player in Trevor Gooseby. And you got another 5-star that's probably making a lot of money in Brandon Baker. That $1 million price point for a player that's not going to see the field until at least 2027 at Texas is probably a non-starter. So let's start. There's a few points to make, and I'm regurgitating a few things that I read in an article on orangebloods.com. Jeff Ketchum broke this down in that article, and I think he had a podcast about it as well. But I'm really regurgitating things from his article. The first point is that there's a salary cap and a budget that exists in the NIL, whether it's visible to us as fans or not, that there is a salary cap and a budget that exists with every single team, and that probably varies by the team and by the donor base, but there's one that exists everywhere, including the University of Texas. And Texas already has a loaded roster in the 3 deep, and a lot of players that are making a pretty penny at the University of Texas, whether they are playing and producing a lot right now or not. Okay? And so the rumor has it from the article that I read and from what Jeff Ketchum has been saying at orangebloods.com is that the Texas Longhorns are on the hook this year and on this roster for, let me go back to the full person view, on this roster for $15 to $20 million in this season. Okay? So that's a lot of money. So I think it's safe to say that if there is a salary cap budget at the University of Texas with its donors, its boosters, whatever you want to call them, the people that contribute to cutting these checks and paying out the payroll at the University of Texas, it's probably somewhere max $20 million a year. All right? This is an 83-man roster with a payroll. So $500,000 to a player like Brandon Baker, and I think it's safe to say he probably makes at least $500,000 a year because he was a 5-star left tackle out of modern day that, like Michael Fasausi, could have picked up the phone and called any school in America and played there, right? So the demand for him was probably closer to $1 million than $500,000. So he's making that, and he's the 3rd-string left tackle right now. So you hear $500,000 and you're thinking NFL-based, league minimum is above $500,000, you're not thinking that's a lot of money. Well, when you're talking about college football players that aren't playing yet, in these billionaire donors' eyes, that's viewed as dead money. Where in the NFL, dead money is when you are paying a player that is not on your roster anymore. He is either playing elsewhere, and you had to cut him and still pay out guarantees to him, and you're paying him to play for another team, or that player isn't playing anywhere and you cut him and he retired, whatever it may be, and I'm paraphrasing what it is, so you can correct me in the comments if you want, but you're paying a guy that is no longer on the roster because you had to cut him and there were guarantees in a contract, right? Well, in the college space, where these boosters, these donors are viewing dead money is in paying a Brandon Baker and other players along the team, maybe Arch Manning, maybe Jonte Cook, maybe Colton Vosick or Colin Simmons, and they are 3rd in the depth chart in their position, right? So it's hard to knock on the door or ring the phone of one of the most brilliant businessmen in the world, which exist in the alumni base at the University of Texas and donor base at the University of Texas, and convince them to fork over 7 figures when they're already forking over 7 figures for something they haven't seen works yet. And whether you like it or not, at least in the NFL, they have a lot more proof and evidence of what they're signing and paying out than what you have of a high school player that hasn't played a down of college football yet. And that's just a fact. All right? And so they're on the hook for $15 to $20 million. And number 2, the Longhorns are not reckless with their money. Now, I would think that if you ask Steve Sarkisian and the coaching staff and others, they would say, we still need more. We're not asking you to be reckless donors, but we're asking you to be not as stingy as you've been to date. Right? So that's still a point, and that still probably needs to happen. And I think it needs to be understood. Whereas there's programs like Texas A&M that throw around their oil money like, sorry, that throw around their oil money like crazy, and they'll be reckless with it. And they bought that class, and you saw how it went. There's the University of Oregon right now, where you see Phil Knight gave them an unlimited NIL budget, and they're buying every player in America right now, and everybody seems to be committing to Oregon, whether they visited there or not. Oregon's doing that. They're playing that ball game right now. Texas has yet to play that ball game to the fullest capacity, and I don't know that they're ever going to play that ball game to the fullest capacity, but they could probably play it at a 65% capacity, whereas they're probably playing at a 35 to 40% capacity on paying the unproven so far, right? Because even in the sense of what you saw A&M do and what you see Oregon currently doing right now, it'll be interesting to see how Oregon acts moving forward. But A&M even took a step back in how reckless they were being initially and throwing money at every single player, whether they fit the culture or not, just trying to five-star stack, right? It bit them in the ass, and not only do they take a step back maybe because it bit them in the ass, but also I'm sure their oil donors in their own right probably stood up and said, hey, I'm not throwing out another $750,000 to a kid that may transfer a year from now because he's not playing enough, right? So I think that you're going to see years where programs, whether it be Texas, whether it be Oregon, whether it be anybody, where they go buy a lot more players than they did the previous year or the year after, and the year after they take a step back and say, hey, we're gonna slow it down on this class, all right? Fill out your needs, find 1 to 3 players that we'll make an exception for, but the rest of them, they're gonna have to play and have different type of priorities. We'll discuss NIL packages and deals with them down the line, okay? And so the thing is, with this Michael Fasausi situation, they're not going to get in a bidding war with Oklahoma and A&M right now, whereas Oklahoma and A&M probably has a stronger need to immediately fill in the left tackle position than the University of Texas does, right? So that's not the position that they're going to get in a bidding war for. What else did I say? 6-7 figures on the bench, dead money. Oh, there was a story that came out on On3 about a player named Josh Petty that just signed with Georgia Tech. I'm going to pull it up real quick. And I think it's very relatable to this situation, so it's important to bring it up and talk about it. Because this kid, Josh Petty, is not on the same planet of Michael Fasausi as a prospect. He's the top 150 type guy. Michael Fasausi is the top 15 type player. And it is being reported, not rumored. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution on 3 posted the article. It is being reported by very trustworthy sourcing that he is getting a payment of at least $800,000 a year annually from Georgia Tech. And he is not a 5-star, or I guess some industry rankings have him as a 5-star interior offensive lineman, but he's not on the same planet of a player as a 5-star top 15 player left tackle blindside protector like Michael Fasausi is, right? So you just have to imagine that if this kid Josh Petty is getting $800 per from Georgia Tech, that the number for Michael Fasausi is starting a lot higher than that. And where Texas sits currently is they have made it clear and obvious from the reporting that I've read from people tapped into the program, tapped in with the donors and other people, that they're not even going to begin to discuss NIL packages with some of these athletes until September, October, at least this season. Okay? So, let me see. I had a note on that as well. So I think it's very important to realize if that's the case, and they're not even going to open up discussion until midway through the football season, October time, October, maybe even into November, December, closer to signing day, then I think it's safe for me to predict they're not going to land Michael Fasausi, at least not going to land his verbal commitment in the summertime before the season starts when NIL weighs such a factor on it. And yet, that doesn't mean they're out on Michael Fasausi. It doesn't mean the sky is falling. And it doesn't mean that they are not working on getting a plan in place for NIL packaging for high school recruits this year and in the future. And there's another note to understand that there's rumors that there is going to be a law passed within the next 12 months, conservatively speaking, that the schools in their own right are about to be able to start paying these players themselves. So the University of Texas will be paying the athletes, and it's not going to be donors. It's not just going to be Ford, Ferrari, or your local lawyers in Columbus, Ohio, cutting checks for players. It'll be the universities cutting checks for players. And as we kick the can down the road and go down the line, there's obviously going to be more structure, salaries, and things of that nature with NIL and players being paid 10, 20 years down the line, right? But as of right now, that's not the case, and Texas is dealing with what it's dealing with. They're getting pushback from donors, and they got to recruit these kids to focus on other things. One last thing I want to talk about. What did Kalik Lockett say, not only before his commitment, but after his commitment? Before his commitment, he acknowledged, and he said, I'm announcing tomorrow at this time, yada, 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 and I'm picking the school that is going to turn me into a first-round receiver. Right? Or I'm paraphrasing, he said something along the lines that I'm picking the school that is going to develop me and that I trust the most to turn me into a first-round draft pick, right? Goes on, commits to Texas. Then he echoes that sentiment. Not only did he commit by calling the receivers coach, Chris Jackson at the University of Texas, who coached in the NFL prior to coming to Texas, to announce his commitment for him on FaceTime into the microphone to his class or to the gym at his high school. Not only did he did that, which is emphasizing the reason that he's coming to Texas, but then he stood on that after the fact that more so than anything that weighs into his decision is that he is coming to Texas to develop into an NFL player, and he's not worried about anything else. So I think Texas' selling point to recruits right now is, hey, you just saw us make the Final Four, get a hair from the national championship. We're preseason number 4 in the country, projected to be right there again, competing for a national championship. Might have a Heisman quarterback, number 1 overall pick. A guy sitting behind him with the same type of expectations. We're deep on the offensive line. We're deep on the defensive line. We're deep in the receiver room. We're deep everywhere else. Come here to Texas and focus right now on NFL and not NIL. Okay? So if you heard and paid closely to the details of the situation and what Kalik Lockett was saying, 5-star receiver out of Sashke, Texas, all-world type of talent, super excited about Kalik Lockett. If you paid close attention to what he was echoing and his reasoning in coming to the University of Texas, then you can hear what the coaches are selling to these recruits right now, and then you can kind of read between the lines when players who were favored to go to Texas for a long period of time all of a sudden are not and go elsewhere. What is this going to be, right? So you can see the priorities of certain players, and I'm not bashing them either in saying that. But it was also reported by Jeff Ketchum that the Longhorns made one exception and one exception only in this entire recruiting class of a player that they were going to discuss NIL packaging with prior to that September, October, or signing day time period, and that was DeCorian Moore out of Duncanville, and he still chose Oregon on practically a whim out of nowhere because they offered more money. Okay, and I know people are saying, oh, no, that's not what it was. I'm saying that's probably what it was. Okay? And so I think when you go back to these donors and they're like, dude, look, you got a million receivers already at Texas. Every year players are transferring in, like Silas Bolden, Isaiah Bond this year. A year ago, A.D. Mitchell and others. We got tight ends that have transferred in. We got receivers that have transferred in, like Ajay Hall that got paid a lot of money to transfer in and then never started, flamed out, and Godspeed to him. You know how that's going, right? It would be illogical to just keep throwing out money to throw out money for the sake of a Haynes King, or whatever the guy's name that does the Haynes King is the quarterback at Georgia Tech. Hayes Fawcett, for a Hayes Fawcett graphic on Twitter and to feel cool for a couple weeks, when at the end of the day, it's still going to come down to the development of the player and the player's desire to get to the NFL and not receive NIL, right? So I think even culturally speaking, they've built such a strong thing at the University of Texas that they're like, hey, we're recruiting and recruiting at the highest level anyways, without even making the NIL push right now. Let's make sure we recruit a bunch of kids and get people on board for the right things. And then after, we'll have time to look into it and develop some NIL packages that are fair for everyone across the board, right? And another thing, You haven't had one kid transfer from the University of Texas because the check didn't clear. Okay? I'm going to say that again. You haven't had one kid transfer since the transfer portal opened up from the University of Texas because of an NIL issue or because they didn't get paid what they anticipated getting paid. I think part of this isn't necessarily donors being cheap, but I think the University of Texas operates in a way where they never want to face humility and embarrassment from not coming through on financial promises or anything in that realm that happens when guys transfer and rumors quickly leak out. I was supposed to make this and I didn't. That happened at A&M. That's happened at Oklahoma as recent as Caden Green. I know Sooner fans don't want to hear it. That was the favorite Sooner of the year from all Sooner fans until he decided to transfer to Missouri. I'm telling you right now, if Caden Green was making Josh Petty $800,000 a year money, if Caden Green was making that type of money at Oklahoma, starting as a freshman, the whole fan base loved him. His spot is secure. He can negotiate more money and had trust in that. He ain't transferring to Missouri just because it's closer to home. All right, it ain't like it's across the country. That's all I'm saying. And I'm not saying that Oklahoma's not going to be able to come through on their promises, or A&M, if that's where Fasausi goes, or that Oregon's going to have that issue. But it's happened across America, and it hasn't happened at Texas. And I think that that's a aspect in the donors being a little tighter with when they open the floodgates to their finances for players. And at the end of the day, these players sign in December. It's August. Flipmas season is still around the corner. All right? As I just said, as we get closer and deeper in the season, the NIL discussions, if that's all it's about, will pick up. All right? The Longhorns aren't done recruiting DeCorian Moore. And if Fasausi commits to Oklahoma or A&M, they're not going to be done recruiting him either. If Jonah Hill commits to Oregon, the Longhorns football and baseball programs aren't going to stop recruiting Jonah Williams. Sorry. Jonah Williams. Listen, I'm ADD. I'm scatterbrained. I get names wrong a lot. If you haven't noticed, get over it. This isn't a fact-checking podcast. Never has been, never will be. That's besides the point. Let's move forward, right? What happens on the field, though, besides that NIL stuff, what happens on the field always has a greater impact than any other impact has on anything in these recruits' decisions. And when it creeps up to leaving mom in December and going and putting all your faith into a coaching staff and a football program to get you to the NFL of where you're trying to go in life, because Texas isn't recruiting any player, 5-star or 3-star, that's not trying to get to the NFL. I can promise you that. And same with Oregon, same with A&M, same with Oklahoma, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, you name it. We aren't recruiting players that don't want to get to the NFL. There's no other reason you're going to play football at Texas. Save any other reason. You're not coming to play school. You're coming to play football. So the players' mindsets at the end of the day, if we get to November, December, and they're committing to a program that is struggling, has struggled under said coaching staff prior, and the future is not any guarantee by any stretch of the imagination, and the Longhorns make another national title type run with Arch Manning lurking in the back, and these other players lurking like Colin Simmons, Brandon Baker, Trevor Gooseby, Jonte Cook, receivers DeAndre Moore, weapons that maybe just get tentative playing time this year that would be starting at other SEC and Big Ten programs across the country. Those guys just lurking. Texas is winning. Oklahoma's not. A&M's not. And I'm just using those programs in reference to this, and this is a hypothetical. But if that's the case, Flipmas season will happen and benefit Texas the way it did with Anthony Hill Jr., the way it did with Kelvin Banks himself. All right? These recruitments, more now than ever, do not end until they end. And that was always the case, but more so now in the year 2024 and moving forward. The verbal commitments in August, June, July, the living, dying on that for your program and the momentum it used to create and your classes and the old school Tom Herman creating mantras for each year's class, like 2018 had a name, 2019 had a name. Remember all that stuff? Those days are dead. These players are focused on building their brand and getting to the NFL. And all the money and the highest bidder isn't always going to be the end-all be-all and what is right for the long money of building your brand and getting yourself to the NFL. And so when you get to November, December, there is going to be an evaluation of the team you're committed to by you, your parents, and your support system to say, hey, do we really trust that you go through to develop through this program for the next 3 to 4 to 5 years to get you to a position to be generationally wealthy and set off, more so than Texas or these other programs that are still recruiting you? Because that's going to happen. And if you're in a position to let go of a coordinator because you had a disappointing year and that coordinator was the main recruiter and said player, or an offensive line coach takes another job and you went 7-5 or whatever it is, Michael Fasausi or XYZ player is going to have to look at that situation and make a tough decision for him and his future, for what's best for him and his family and him getting to the NFL. So that's around the corner as well. And that's where these donors can look at that and say, hey, I'm not just chomping at the bit to give a kid $1 million promise in August when his senior season hasn't even played out, and he sure as hell hasn't played it down at Texas. And I'm on boat with all of that, dude. I think that there's probably a better balance to find, and maybe they still need to give more than they are. I'm not on these phone calls with donors, and I'm not the one reporting what I'm even regurgitating right now. I'm just telling you my opinions and reaction to what I've reported and stuff, what I've heard reported. But at the end of the day, that's a logical way to go about it. And it's not just Texas that echoes these things. You heard Brian Kelly echo this when he lost on some defensive tackles in the transfer portal. You heard Sark has echoed it many times. I've heard Nick Saban echo it when he was still at Alabama. Kirby Smart says it every single year. You know what I mean? Like, they're not paying out the ass for players to come to Georgia, if at all, in some circumstances. Players are going to Georgia to win championships and go play in the NFL and drive Hellcats. That's neither here nor there. I digress. But it's interesting. That's the Michael Fasausi discussion. Tell me what you think in the comments about where he's going and what you think about that NIL discussion and how things are going to move going forward for other teams. And do you really see, do you see a year where you're spending a lot and then the next year your team takes a step back? Like, is that what we should grow to expect? Let me know. Tell me in the comments. Let's move forward. We're at 47 minutes. I'm going to move quickly through a few more things and then close this puppy out with that top 25 reaction. I talked about LSU in the last podcast. Talked about the growth that I was hearing on their defense. And there was a On3 article by the Bengal Tiger that I read yesterday that caught my attention. And it kind of echoes some of the things I was saying, that it's going to come down to for LSU on whether they are what they were the last 2 years under Brian Kelly, or if they can take that next step and be a true contender. All right, last year they ranked below the top 100 in pretty much every defensive category, and that is beyond unacceptable, which is why they brought in an entirely new defensive coaching staff, like defensive coordinator and linebacker coach Blake Baker. Important to note linebacker coach there, because I think he's going to work wonders, or already has worked wonders, in Harold Perkins. And I'm going to get into that in this article that I read. And then you got defensive line coach, interior defensive line superstar in Bo Davis, who they pouched from the University of Texas, which only a few programs in America would be able to do that, regardless of his ties to the LSU program. He played football there. Obviously, there was some other stuff with his son being allowed to play there and not at Texas. That's neither here nor there. They pouched Bo Davis, got him to come in and fix those interior defensive line problems. Bo Davis is going to fix the interior defensive line problems. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how quickly. I think that no matter what, it's better than what it was last year. Okay? And out of reports, these players are improving. You brought in some kids in the transfer portal, even though you missed on some. You brought in some. You brought in five-star defensive tackle in his own right. Let's not forget about that. That could have picked up the phone and played for anybody in the country himself, and Dominic McKinley. Texas recruited Dominic very hard. A&M was ready to offer Dominic all the money in the world to go to A&M. He made a decision to go to A&M, stay closer to home, and other things, right? And that was a hard recruitment to win, especially coming off a season where you had like the worst interior defensive line of all time. To get an interior D lineman that could have gone anywhere, that's pretty fucking impressive. So they're going to be fine, and it's going to get better. But, and that's not to mention bringing back Corey Raymond, legend at LSU. Can't believe he ever left, but they brought him back. Secondary will improve. Recruiting will get to where it needs to be. Let's talk about this article that I read on the Bengal Tiger talking about helmet comms and what LSU is going to do that I think will make a major difference for their defense. And I'm sure other coordinators around the country are going to do stuff like this. If I was a defensive coordinator, I would do this, and I think you could expect Steve Sarkisian in the offensive side to be doing this with their quarterbacks, obviously, but you need to be doing this with your defense. So let me read this and tell you how I think that this will be a major benefit to LSU, Harold Perkins, and their defense this year. So here it goes. Here's a tidbit to pass along that I've heard buzz around, but want to see if it becomes the approach this season. The word is given Penn's experience at linebacker, and that is, I don't know if he's talking about who is Penn. I don't know. Fuck it. Penn's experience at linebacker and history at getting the calls from the sideline and setting the defense up, he might not need to be the one player that the defense who gets to wear the earpiece to communicate with Baker via the headset before the plays. Instead, there's confidence Penn can handle calls coming in from the sidelines, your natural signals, what have you, like he did a year ago. So they're going to keep signaling in defensive signals, which that's the risk they're willing to take on signal stealing and stuff like that. Okay, that's fine. So they're going to send them in to the player that brought that did that a year ago, right? And then I'm told LSU is testing out having the communication device, the helmet comms, in the helmet of Harold Perkins, where Baker wants to move Perkins around a good bit, giving opponent offenses different looks, things to struggle with, things that you have to game plan for, things that you got to deal with at the line of scrimmage. You always got to find, where's Harold Perkins? Where's he rushing the passer here? Is he playing at the mic? Where's Harold Perkins? You have to make the offense do that when you got a player like that. The direct communication pre-snap between Baker and Perkins is an intriguing approach that is being explored. That, my friends, is massive. And, I imagine that they're 100% going to do that. Why would you not do that? That allows the ability to, like they said, the defense to be called by the captain of the defense, the guy that's used to doing it, used to getting everybody lined up already, ahead mentally of maybe where Harold Perkins is, and then you still get to have the helmet comms with Harold Perkins where the coach is lining him up on every single play, telling him, be here, do this, read, react, where he is going to be a superstar. If Harold Perkins stays healthy, and that's the case, Harold Perkins is going to go from that sophomore slump to the All-American we thought he was going to be and be a top 15 pick conservatively in next year's NFL draft. And I think that is a major update that people need to pay attention to with the Bayou Bengals going into the season. Because like I said, Brian Kelly, that offensive side of the ball with Nussmeier, I think is going to be more than fine. They're going to have a good running game. They got the best offensive line in America, and you're always going to have weapons at LSU. All right? So that's going to be fine, even if it's not as good as the record-breaking offense they had a year ago. It doesn't have to be. It'll still be top 3 to 4 in the SEC, and that's good enough. Your defense improves through coaching development, schematic changes, practice changes like tackling. Believe it or not, tackling more in practice means you will tackle better in a game. Who would have ever thought that was a thing? There was two things. I'm not going to be too sidetracked with my ADD, but in two separate worlds, the fighting world and the football world, where there was like a 3-year span where in football, Lincoln Riley's and others were preaching this simulated tackling versus actual tackling is all you need to do, and we're not going to get players hurt and be better that way. They will feel better in games. And then you got in games and people couldn't actually tackle and were soft and sucked and avoided contact, and you had the worst defenses in America because of it. Now you got to backtrack, and Lincoln Riley is focusing on the physicality aspect in practice and change his philosophy. Well, that was the same thing in the fight game for like 3 years when people like stopped sparring. And it was the dumbest thing I've ever heard Joe Rogan say in my life. He was encouraging that and being like, you don't need to spar, just light spar and simulated sparring for your actual fights. And those guys started getting knocked out in every fight that were doing that. As if you don't need to practice fighting to be really good at fighting the best fighters in the world. Same with tackling. Well, LSU was doing that bullshit the first few years. Now they're tackling more, so they're going to tackle better in practice. Blake Baker, I'm very, very high on. So the linebacker play is going to improve, but when you got a better defensive coordinator, a better captain steering the ship, It's going to improve naturally, and like I've said many times, it can't get worse. But I think that helmet comms thing with Harold Perkins is massive, and I can't wait to see how much freer the Harold Perkins plays and how much better and faster he plays. He's going to cause a lot more problems. And as I said on the last episode, LSU can win every game on their schedule. They don't have the hardest schedule in the SEC. Also interested to see how Javian Toviano plays this year. Some other players that, like Texas, lost to LSU. I mentioned Dominic McKinley already. You got Toviano. Harold Perkins is one of those guys. They got the talent, and now they got the better coaching, in my opinion. So, Bayou Bengals, exciting news. Sounds like they're developing in the right areas. Oh, jeez. Acid reflux could have never been gay. Let's go on top 25. The AP released the top 25 preseason poll. Let me pull it up for you. They got Georgia number 1, Ohio State number 2, Oregon number 3, Texas number 4. That's what I think everybody assumed anyways. It says it has Texas dropping from 3 to 4. I guess they maybe had another poll. Alabama 5, 6 Ole Miss, 7 Notre Dame, Penn State 8, Michigan 9, Florida to round out the top 10. Then you finish off 11 through 20. Mizzou, Utah, LSU, Clemson, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Miami, A&M, Arizona, Kansas, USC, North Carolina State, Iowa State. Let's talk about it at the top, 1 through 10, give you my thoughts and reactions, and then, some takeaways, teams that play each other, teams that maybe will fall out of it, all kinds of shit. I'm just going to look at it, give you my thoughts off the top of the dome. Georgia, number 1, that's expected. Best roster in the country. Most people assume that, think that, feel that way. I pretty much feel that way. I'm fine with Georgia, number 1. Number 2, Ohio State's at number 2. That's everybody's consensus, number 2. Not really mine. Will Howard is not that good, was announced as the starter yesterday, and they have legitimate offensive line concerns. Got a not that good quarterback, offensive line concerns. I don't know why they're always crowned. The other team that's always crowned, Oregon. Why is Oregon and Ohio State just always crowned? Like, they're just crowned top tier in the nation this year. And by top tier, I mean top 4, gonna compete for the national championship, if not everybody's national championship prediction. Both guys got mid quarterbacks. Don't give a shit what you say. Mid quarterbacks. Will Howard is a great value Sam Ehlinger. And Dillon Gabriel's going into his 10th year as a quarterback for a reason. There's a reason he has not been able to leave for the NFL draft, and it's because his ceiling is not high enough to be a high draft pick, and it never will be. Okay? Dillon Gabriel versus elite defenses throughout his career is pedestrian as a passer. And that's going to continue this year when he plays the top defense in America in Ohio State. At least with Ohio State, it's like they undoubtedly got the best defense in America. So, all right, that's fine. They can win the national championship. Defense wins championships. Oregon is more like they were last year than anybody wants to acknowledge. I get they bring in guys like Evan Stewart, Jabbar Muhammad, some defensive line help, right? They're going to be good defensively. But Dillon Gabriel is just, he's not as talented as Bo Nix. And I'm not even the highest in the world on Bo Nix. You've heard me talk down on that draft pick, how he was one of the worst first-round draft picks I think that there's ever going to be. You downgraded at quarterback. But they're just crowned top 3, top 2 team. Whatever. Whatever. Texas at number 4. I've talked enough about Texas. Bama at number 5. Talked very, very highly about Bama. Bama is going to go as far as this guy right here can take them. Jalen Milroe. How he improves as a passer is going to determine whether they're competing for a national championship or they maybe miss the playoffs. Because they're so fucking good and talented. He's got to improve as a decision maker and as a passer. I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. Because as I said about Quinn Ewers earlier, proven commodity, Jalen falls in that category of guys that I don't understand why everybody is naturally rating ahead of Quinn Ewers going into the season. By everybody watching National League college football show on YouTube or anywhere else and hear how they just cast doubt on Quinn Ewers and give the benefit of the doubt to guys like Jalen Milroe. All right? So Jalen Milroe a year ago, he had 2,800 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He also had 531 rushing yards with 12 touchdowns. So he had around 3,400 total yards and 36 touchdowns. 35, 36 touchdowns. Right? Great year. Great year. But let's talk about his game log. Quinn, he was so... Okay, let's talk about the Texas game. Start with the Texas game. The game that got him benched for another game. 14 of 27, 255, 51.9% completion percentage. 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Should have been 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. One of the touchdowns was a dropped interception by Jalen Ford, caught by Alabama player in the end zone. He had 15 rushes for 44 yards, 2.9 yards a carry. He wasn't a threat at all as a rusher to the Texas Longhorns defense. Move forward. He played a good Ole Miss team. 17 of 21 for 225 passing yards, 16 rushes for 28 yards, 1.8 yards a carry. I understand sacks are counted in this. Not threatening Ole Miss as a rusher, right? There's a pattern here, huh? Plays another good defense in A&M a year ago. He actually had a good game as a passer. 21 for 33, 321, 63.6% completion percentage. 3 touchdowns to 1 INT, a 169.3 rating, and negative 31 yards rushing. Couldn't run at all in A&M. I guess he got sacked a lot. Let's move forward. The third Saturday in October, Tennessee. I'm not saying they had a world-beating defense, but that's a rivalry game. He goes 14 to 21, 220 yards, 66.7% completion percentage. 2 touchdowns, 1 interception to 9 carries, 3 yards, no tutties. All right. And this is in a more option-style Tommy Rees offense with more designed QB run than he is going to have for sure under Kalen DeBoer. All right, so I gassed this team up last episode. Let's talk some real shit in this episode. LSU game. They had one of the worst defenses in America rushing-wise. So he had 20 carries for 155 and 4 total touchdowns. Ran all over them. They wanted nothing to do with Jalen Milroe. As a passer, it just really didn't matter. 15, 23, 219, 65% completion percentage. No touchdowns, no picks. Auburn, the Iron Bowl. He had pretty fucking good numbers in the Iron Bowl, but Auburn was not good last year. It just ended up being a close game. 16 to 24 for 259, 2 tutties, no interceptions. 18 carries, 107, no touchdowns, 5.9 a carry. Really good game. And then obviously the dramatic Hail Mary to win the damn thing. And I would have to go back and watch the tape on that game of why it was so close and what he contributed to that. So I'm just stat reading, and I think what a lot of people do with Quinn Ewers is they only stat read and they don't look into context. SJ Show gives context, baby. Subscribe, like, and tell your friends. Let's go back to Jalen Milroe. Move forward. SEC Championship game. 13 of 23, 192, 56.5% completion percentage. 14 carries, 29 yards, 2.1 a carry, no touchdowns. He had 2 passing touchdowns. Did not light the world on fire. They just won the game. Because Carson Beck didn't light the world on fire either. Whatever. Michigan, playoff game. 16 for 23, 116. So he had a 69% completion percentage, but could not push the ball down the field or try to against Michigan. Just really took care of the ball. 21 carries for 63 yards, no touchdown. So 3 yards per carry was a factor in the running game, but not really. So let's talk about it. The best 3 defenses that he played last year. Let's just do the best 3. Off the top of my head, I'm going to go ahead and assume that's Texas, Georgia, Michigan. First, the best 3 defenses Jalen Milroe played a year ago. He had under a 60% completion percentage in 2 of those games. All right. He had under 200 passing yards in all 3 of them. And he only had over 50 rushing yards in 1 of them against Michigan. He had 0 rushing touchdowns in all 3 of them. His QB rating against Texas was 61. Against Georgia, 75.8, not terrible. Against Michigan, 48. That's awful. Okay? So, spare me the bullshit on me being biased with Texas, and y'all aren't being biased with Texas hate when there is so much natural doubt cast on Quinn Ewers, but benefit of the doubt on guys like Jalen Milroe. You know what? I'm going to pull up Dylan Gabriel just because I don't give a shit. Dylan Gabriel. We're at an hour 4. Shonee Jackson Show goes a while, but I give you the time step so you can fast forward and whatnot. Dylan Gabriel. Splits. Also, let's do Milroe splits fourth quarter. Remember when I read the fourth quarter splits of how great the fourth quarter splits were of Quinn Ewers? Last year in the fourth quarter, 27 of 44 for 348 passing yards, 61.4% completion percentage, 2 touchdowns to 1 interception, 9 sacks, 31 carries for 91 yards, and a touchdown. Those were his fourth quarter stats a year ago. Milroe. Not bad. Not Quinn Ewers, but not bad. Literally sipping drops out of this water. I got to fill that up better. Gabriel splits a year ago. Game log. Let's go the best 3 defenses that Gabriel played a year ago. Excuse me for the 15th time. Jesus. Texas, I would say, is on there. They fucking played a shit-ass schedule. Cincinnati, Texas, Kansas? Texas, he went 23 of 38, 285. A lot of that came in the last few drives of the game. 60.85% completion percentage. Didn't get over that until the last drive of the game. Didn't get over 60%. He was below 60%. 1 touchdown, no interceptions. The big thing was the 14 carries on 113 yards. Really took Texas by surprise, scrambling around. He had like a large gain on a QB draw. Against Kansas, he was 14 of 19 for 171, 0 touchdowns and interception, 14 carries, 64 yards. Splits. Let's see if there's some ranked opponents career splits thing. By teams. First AP top 25. Here we go. I should have been reading this the whole time. Pull it up for you guys. AP top 25 teams. Dylan Gabriel is 23 for 38, 285, 60.5% completion percentage, 7.5 yards per completion, 1 touchdown to 0 interceptions. Had 14 carries for 113, 8.1 yards, 1 touchdown in 2023. That was a year ago. I'll pull up some other stuff after I pull up these other 2. The splits for Jalen Milroe versus AP top 25 teams. Where's this at? AP top 25. He was 89 for 138 for 1,200 passing yards, 64.5% completion percentage, 7 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. That's not good. 95 carries, 322 rushing yards to 4 touchdowns. Not terrible. 4 interceptions is too much. And then let's do Quinn Ewers. This is live, by the way. I haven't looked at this directly. This is all off a hunch that I've watched and felt. So, Quinn, I'm not reading the right thing. AP top 25. All right, here we go. 114 for 164, 1,400 passing yards, 69.5% completion percentage, so he's better in all of those categories. Better in yards per attempt, 8.9. 9 touchdowns. Let me see. Jalen Milroe had 7, and Gabriel had 1. To 3 interceptions, 8 sacks, 22 carries, 57 yards. All right, so that was right there live for you. Versus AP top 25 teams, Quinn Ewers is better than Jalen Milroe and Dylan Gabriel. Let's look at Dylan Gabriel 2022. Oh, boy. Versus AP top 25, he played more in 2022, I think, than he did in 2023. 63 for 106, 905, 905 yards. 59.4% completion percentage. This is what Dylan Gabriel is versus AP top 25. 5 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. 30 carries, 84 yards, 3 touchdowns. Let's look at 2021. Where the hell is it? Split season, home, month. I don't have the AP top 25 splits for 2021. Anyhow, that's dragging along. Let's go back to the AP top 25. So, I would put Oregon and Alabama behind number 6 in Ole Miss. I've been high on Ole Miss. Go back to the past podcast, listen to it. Been high on Ole Miss. I think I got them in the SEC championship. Them or Alabama. Depends on the quarterback play. Can Jalen Milroe take another step, be better in those games, be better as a passer, as a processor? I would have Texas at number 2 or number 1 behind Georgia or in front of Georgia. And then you go down Notre Dame. I'm high on Notre Dame. I'd have them. So I'd have Oregon, Alabama behind Ole Miss and Notre Dame slotted ahead of Penn State and Michigan. Right? So I'd have them at 7 and 8 or whatever that would be. Got Penn State. I think Drew Aller's an ass bag. Michigan, they need to find a quarterback, but elite defense. They got other drama. We'll see how that works out. Florida State, I don't know. I don't believe in DJ, so I don't know. Number 10, I can see them falling out of the race. Missouri at number 11. Good on Missouri. Missouri can fight for a playoff spot, but they're fighting an uphill battle in the SEC. Utah, we'll see. They should be able to contend for the Big 12. LSU at number 13. Look, if they figure out that defensive stuff, like I said, if Harold Perkins takes off with those helmet comms, they should be a playoff team. LSU could surpass Alabama. 14, Clemson, we'll see. They got a really good roster, but, Dabo just doesn't adapt to anything. Andrew Makuba comes out and says that he left Clemson because he felt like he wasn't being developed. So, interesting there. I'm high on Tennessee, but they got a redshirt freshman quarterback. Deal with the ups and downs of that in a very challenging SEC. See if they can fight for a playoff spot. I think that's a good ranking. Oklahoma, I think they're going to lose 4 or 5 games, maybe 6 games this year. So don't expect them to be ranked when it's all said and done. Oklahoma State, they'll find a way to compete for the Big 12. Kansas State should be competing for the conference championship. Miami, got to do it. This is the year you need to make the title for with Cam Ward in year 3 with Cristobal. Sorry, I'm talking too fast. Year 3 with Cristobal. Need to make the playoffs. Cam Ward, I got him as my dark horse Heisman guy. A&M, screw them. Arizona, Noah Fafita, number 21. I think that's fair. Kansas, 22. My pick to be in the Big 12 championship. My Big 12. I don't know. I'm not going to say that yet, but maybe my Big 12. Potentially my Big 12 champion pick. The University of Kansas. Need to look into their defense more. But potentially my Big 12 champion pick. Kansas, number 22. I do think they will climb in the rankings as the year goes on. 23, SC. See how good their defense gets, similar to LSU. Those two play week 1. That's exciting. NC State burns your ass anytime you think they're going to be good, so whatever. Iowa, they're always number 25. NC State and Iowa are like habitually number 24 and number 25 in the preseason. And then matchups this year. Texas and Georgia play, so that'll work itself out. Ohio State and Oregon play. Oregon plays Ohio State and Michigan. Obviously, Michigan plays Ohio State. Ole Miss plays Alabama and Georgia, I believe. Penn State will play Michigan and Ohio State still, I think. And maybe Oregon. Missouri and Oklahoma play. LSU will play Bama, A&M, and others. Oklahoma plays Missouri, Texas, Bama, LSU. Good luck. Tennessee plays Oklahoma, the first conference game of the SEC. Oklahoma and Kansas State play, I believe. A&M and Texas rekindling their rivalry this year. Kansas will play some of these Big 12 ranked teams. Notre Dame plays A&M week 1. Number 7 versus number 20 right out the gates. So, it's a stacked unit, man. And who's going to make the final Big 12? I was going to do a little prediction today, but we're already at an hour 13, so I'm going to wrap this fucker up. Next episode, I'll do the on 3 SEC players. I'll do a playoff prediction and some other shit. Stuff's going to happen between now and Monday, but that is a wrap for today's show. I did some things I didn't expect, like the QB comparison there. Quinn Ewers is a badass, don't forget it. But that's a wrap on episode 14. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. Do me a favor. Please share with your friends. Help grow this channel. I'm working really hard. I want to put more time into it than I even am in the editing. This is a raw, one take and upload version that you see each week. So the more of the following grows, the more time and resources I will be able to have and do more stuff with this episode, edit it, do other stuff, create other content outside the SJ show. So please like and subscribe, share it with your friends, and follow me on the socials. Other than that, I love y'all more than you know, not as much as you think. Have a lovely weekend, and God bless. Ending, not starting soon. Thanks for watching. Goodbye. Love you guys.